I'm Chris Ingram. Welcome to Common Ground. I'd like to welcome back our guest host to the show, Alan Clendenin of Tampa. Alan, welcome.
Thanks, Chris. Following Hurricane Hermine a few weeks ago, Floridians and residents up and down the east coast of the United States were reminded of the power of such storms and the destructive force water has on our homes and our communities.
Here in Florida, residents of coastal Pasco and Citrus counties experienced flooding at high levels. While flooding cannot be totally prevented, the question remains, are we doing enough to prevent what we can, and are we doing enough in the way we respond to flood emergencies?
State and federal laws and regulations address where and what can be built, as well as what types of insurance programs are available to home property owners, but are they enough?
Let's take a look at some of those other questions about flooding and flood insurance and see where we might be able to find some common ground.
Should property owners be allowed to rebuild in known flood zones, or should they be compensated for their losses and then prohibited from rebuilding?
Is the private insurance market adequately regulated or not regulated enough as it relates to rates and paying claims?
Should property owners be forced to buy flood insurance, or is it their right to roll the dice and take a chance that a disaster won't occur in their backyard?
Those are some of the questions about flood insurance that need to be answered.
To help us get to the bottom of some of these questions, we welcome Jerry Albrecht, a flood insurance litigation attorney with the Butler law firm. Jerry, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Jerry, there are a lot of problems across Florida and our nation as it relates to flood insurance, but let's talk about Florida for a minute. You're an attorney specialized in litigation with regard to insurance, property claims, and particularly flood. What's the number one thing, in your opinion, that the legislature could do to help solve Florida's particularly flood insurance problem?
I think the number one thing is the legislature has to realize that one way or another the federal government is going to get out and is getting out of subsidizing flood insurance. And so we in Florida and the legislature need to address flood insurance and to make sure that we have a private flood insurance program in this state.
Well, very good. Do you foresee that the legislature will, it seems like they're going to have to do it, but do they have the stomach to do it and to do it right?
I think they have to. I don't see any other option as we go out in the outlying years. The increase in premiums is going to be incredible. So I think that the legislature and the Department of Financial Services needs to address the issue and make sure that we have a private insurance market here in the state of Florida for flood policies.
What about reinsurance, where the federal government caps catastrophic losses so that maybe the market would be willing to enter in the flood insurance program?
You can have several types of flood insurance. For example, there are about 10 companies right now in the state that are writing, either through your policy or through an endorsement, flood insurance that would pay directly for your flood insurance claim. There are those companies that are also writing excess insurance. They would pay above and beyond what the National Flood Insurance Program would pay. All of these insurers that are going to write this insurance in the state, the private insurers, are going to have some sort of reinsurance program to back them up. Private reinsurance, just like we do for hurricane losses and wind losses and things like that. So I think we do need and will have an active reinsurance program, but I think it's going to be a private reinsurance program.
Recently there's been a lot of fraud involving flood claims. Tell us a little bit about that and what might be done to help fix that problem.
There has been a lot of fraud in water claims, not so much in the flood policies. We haven't seen it so much in the flood policies, but we're talking about flooding in a house when your pipe breaks and water floods your house. There's an explosion of litigation with what we call these AOB vendors. They're assignment of benefits. They're these contractors that come to your house after a flood loss or a water loss, and then they get your insurance claim and they make the claim and they litigate the claim. And there is an explosion of litigation throughout the state on that issue.
That almost seems counterintuitive to the way that insurance claims are normally handled, is it not?
It is. We've had instances where claims are assigned to these what we call the AOB vendors or contractors, and we investigate it and we find out that the insureds in many instances don't even know that the claim is being made, or they testify that there is no damage.
So the federal flood insurance program, was Hurricane Katrina and then Sandy created a $23 billion debt in that program. If it wasn't for those events, I understand that it would be liquid and a viable program. Should the federal government just forgive that debt and continue as we're going now?
I don't know if they're going to forgive the debt. They certainly need to deal with it, and more importantly, they need to move forward. As we've had storms that we've just had recently, we are going to have more storms and stronger storms, and we need to address that.
Well, Jerry, we appreciate your insight on this important issue facing Floridians.
Jerry Albrecht helped explain some of the problems with the private insurance market for flood insurance and some of the bogus claims that add to the cost of that insurance.
So let's take a look at some of those questions about how our government regulates flood insurance, as well as some of the underlying issues related to flooding, and see where we can find common ground. Alan, I think the first question we need to ask is, should property owners be allowed to rebuild in flood zones, sometimes multiple times after flooding occurs?
Well, we see examples like in Pasco County over the last couple of years where some of these working class families and retired people have had their homes flooded in some areas that are not traditional flood zones. So sometimes those people need a little bit of help to make sure that their homestead exists and they have a place to live.
Well, I agree with you that we should help folks, and if we have to move them, give them some sort of compensation or subsidy to get out of that flood zone. If they can't build back up to standards of code and the flood plain elevation, so that if a flood occurs again, that there's not these types of great losses. But I think on the whole, we probably disagree on this one. Maybe don't have common ground, but we're close.
I think we're close.
All right.
So is the private insurance market adequately regulated, Chris?
You know, as a Republican, I'd have to say that I typically don't think that we need all these regulations, but in the case of insurance, I think that we really do. It's just incumbent upon the state to do it and to do it right, and currently I don't think that we're doing a very good job at it, both at Tallahassee and at the federal level in Congress.
I think we have a lot of common ground there. I agree. I think that there's a responsibility for our legislature and our governor in Tallahassee, as well as Congress and the White House, to make sure that citizens of the state of Florida and the entire United States are adequately insured and there's a safety net for folks that are affected by natural disasters.
Well, that's great. We have common ground on that one. Next question is, should taxpayers bail out property owners who didn't have flood insurance, or they didn't have enough flood insurance, whether they felt like they needed it or not?
Well, as we've seen, over 20% of flood claims come from areas that are not traditionally high hazard areas. It's most, especially in the state of Florida, we know how vulnerable many of our coastal areas and our communities are. So I think there's a common interest with the taxpayers in the United States to make sure that these people are taken care of.
Well, you know, I think that we don't agree on this one, because the flood insurance program, the national program, as well as private market insurance is out there and available. And a lot of people, I think, are under the assumption that just because their bank doesn't require them to purchase flood insurance, that they don't live in an area that could be overcome by flooding. And so they don't buy that. But that's a matter of, you know, really education and to some level ignorance on the part of the homeowner. And I certainly don't think that taxpayers should be bailing people out when they just didn't do what they should have otherwise done, whether their bank told them to do it or not.
Well, perhaps the common ground is finding a way for them to expand the pool of folks that are covered by the flood insurance program, to open up so that more people share that risk, and it makes the flood insurance more affordable and more widely available to folks.
Well, that sounds like a great idea. And here on Common Ground, we try to not just debate the issues, we look for solutions. Alan, one solution that I'd like to offer is we need to rein in the frivolous lawsuits brought by contractors who claim assigned benefits for flood claims that are not legitimate. Those claims lead to higher rates for all consumers, and the legislature in Tallahassee should put a stop to them immediately.
That's a great idea, Chris. Insurance fraud impacts nearly every person and every business in the state of Florida. Here's another idea. Over 20% of the flood damage comes from areas outside the designated as high-risk areas. The foundation of the insurance market is built on spreading risk among diverse and large numbers of policyholders. Congress must increase the size of the national flood insurance risk pool by increasing the number of property owners required to purchase flood insurance.
That's a great point, Alan. And as we've seen, flood insurance is in need of some reforms, and the Florida legislature and Congress need to take action to prevent flooding where it can be done, and to ensure that property owners have the right insurance options that are affordable and available. Make no mistake, this is an issue where there should be lots of common ground. What do you think? And just as important, what do your friends and neighbors think? We encourage you to go out and talk to them, even some of whom you know you likely disagree with, and talk to them about this issue. And maybe you'll be able to find a little common ground on your own.
If we can do it, we should expect our elected officials to do it also. If you'd like to share your views with us, follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/commongroundtv. That's Common Ground for this week.